Hello, everybody. Welcome to session 9. My name is Miyoko Saito. I'm the head of the training and education programs at the IIEP, which is international. Okay, there's some echoes that I am hearing. I'll just start again. I'm Miyoko Saito from the IIEP, the International Institute for Educational Planning, which is part of UNESCO. I will be chairing this session. Today we will have 4 presentations, and I'm going to just briefly introduce each presentation and the presenters just before each of them. So the first one is going to be by Debbie Wong and Elizabeth Cassidy. The presentation title is Effective Teaching, Measurable Learning. Now, Debbie Wong is from Australian Council for Education Research, and Elizabeth Cassidy is also from the same organization, ACER. Okay, so the floor is yours, Debbie and Elizabeth.
Okay, well, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, good afternoon from Australia. We're at the end of our day here, but we're really very pleased to be participating in this conference and presenting part of our research to all of you today. I'm Elizabeth Cassidy, and my colleague Debbie Wong and I are going to present some interim findings, and we've called this session Effective Teaching, Measurable Learning. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about our teacher development multi-country studies. This program, our study was, so why, excuse me, way back in 2016, Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade commissioned an evaluation, and they wanted to know 2 questions. What are the conditions of success for teacher development? And to what extent have investments contributed to improved outcomes? And during that evaluation, they reviewed 27 teacher development investments from 17 different country programs. And the result was the Investing in Teachers evaluation. But significantly, the finding was almost no data on outcomes that could be attributed to DFAT's teacher investments could be documented. So a recommendation came out of that report was that DFAT should work systematically to improve its monitoring and evaluation of outcomes from teacher development investments. And that's where we at ACER come in through our multi-year studies in Timor-Leste, Vanuatu, and Laos, which we'll be talking about today. So we today are talking about key findings around 4 themes that are starting to emerge from the first phase of the study. And these themes we find can enable or constrain the success of any teacher development investment. So the themes we'll be talking about today are language of instruction, approach to teacher development, embedding teacher development, and monitoring teaching quality and student learning. Next slide. So I'll give you just a bit of a background and DFAT's interest of their investment in the countries. In all 3 of the countries, Timor-Leste, Vanuatu, and Laos, each have implemented a new curriculum. Timor-Leste and Vanuatu around 2015-16, and Laos in 2015, and these are in the primary years. Now, the principles of each curricula are very, very similar across countries. In all 3 countries, of course, there's new content of the curriculum. They include student-centered pedagogies, And there is some element of sequenced lessons or sequenced and scripted lessons in the case of Timor-Leste. In Vanuatu and Laos, classroom-based assessment is also an explicit aim in the new curriculum. So the Australian investment in each of these countries differs by country. It's probably most different in Timor-Leste, where it's completely focused on teachers and school leader professional learning. So it's a phased expansion that started in 2016 and includes school leadership training, peer learning groups for teachers and school leaders, a mentoring program, and IT that includes tablets distributed to school leaders to support monitoring of teachers in schools. In both Vanuatu and Laos, the teacher investments are part of a larger education sector program. So it supports a national level curriculum implementation rollout. And teachers are provided with in-service training about the new curriculum. Teaching and learning materials are distributed to them. And in Laos, there's additional grants to 32 districts for professional learning. Next slide, Debbie. So our overarching research question: to what extent does the Australian investment produce improved teaching quality and improved student learning? So each research question is contextualized really to each country, but we're interested in these three sub-questions. To what extent does the investment support improved teaching quality? To what extent does the investment support effective implementation of the new curriculum? And finally, to what extent does the investment lead to improved student learning? Next slide. So we're using a mixed methodology that's very similar country by country. In Timor-Leste and Vanuatu, we have access to existing and planned student assessment data. In Laos, we've had the opportunity and budget to develop a fit-for-purpose student assessment, and also we have been able to develop a survey that's been distributed to teachers and principals. Debbie will talk a bit more about those assessments later in our presentation. The qualitative research, we use a case study approach in each country using a purposive sample. We have interviews and focus group discussions with education stakeholders, and we also include classroom observations. The methodology we use is an event-based or time segment coding on those observations in order to map lesson activity. So the study duration is over 5 years, and we've had 3 cycles, or we will have 3 cycles of data collection. I'm sure, like all of you, 2020 was a lost year in terms of our study, and so it's been delayed. We had no data collection because of COVID impacts last year, but we've been able to do data collection in all 3 countries this year, really thanks to our fantastic in-country research partners. So at the end of 2022, we plan to have a final report of this study series. Next slide. So I'm going to talk, before handing over to Debbie, I'll talk very briefly about our first of the 4 themes. Language of instruction. So all 3 countries have multilingual contexts, but each take different approaches to language policy and the language of instruction. So as we all know in international literature, the implementation of language policies can enable or hinder the quality of teaching and learning process. But I'll just give you a quick insight into language-based findings in each of the countries. So in Vanuatu, the ability of teachers to use Bishama or a vernacular language in the classroom was reported to be a factor in improving teacher confidence. Similarly with students, the use of a language that most students are familiar with seems to support greater engagement in the early years. from the transition to French and English is in year 4, and that's been identified as a key risk to student learning gains because of delays in curriculum rollout and teacher training in those years. In Lao, during the baseline, study findings indicate that Lao language literacy levels were concerning. Of the grade 1 students tested, 60% demonstrated limited or no Lao language literacy skills at all, and only 3% were considered proficient. So low Lao language skills were identified as the most pressing obstacle to student progress. And I should remind you that the Lao baseline was done in 2019 at the same time that the new curriculum was rolled out. And finally, in Timor-Leste, Tetum is taught in the early years, but often teachers, there's a reliance on teaching resources that are either in Portuguese or Tetum. And this can limit the accessibility of content and create some confusion among teachers. Some of the respondents have identified language barriers as compounding some of the general challenges of implementing the curriculum. And with that, I will hand over to Debbie.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. I'll now speak about the key findings from the 3 other themes that are emerging from our study during this first phase. This second theme is approach to teacher development. And what we found so far is that the policy progress to deepen and facilitate professional learning programs is varied in each country, but there are certain commonalities that are worthwhile mentioning. Firstly, that given resource constraints, there's an over-reliance on cascade type training models using master trainers to introduce teachers to new curriculum approaches. And therefore, the comprehensiveness of these training programs and the degree of follow-up support is quite limited. There's also variation in who gets to participate in the training. And second, the qualifications and experience of teachers also varies widely. With many teachers without formal qualifications. There are a mix of permanent, temporary, untrained and volunteer teachers across our 3 countries. And this makes us wonder, with the emphasis placed on training input as the major teacher development intervention, then what degree of change to teaching practices can we actually expect? And this is particularly the case if teachers have not engaged in formal teacher education programs. And finally, given the use of standardised approaches to teacher development, there's a question of whether they will be able to meet the specific teaching and learning challenges. And I've highlighted a few here. For example, in Vanuatu, there's a high number of untrained and temporary teachers in the early years, and multi-grade classes are prevalent. In Laos, our baseline study found that teaching Lao language as a foreign language is a significant challenge, given that only 1/3 of students speak Lao at home, and there's also quite a lot of multi-grade classes. And in Timor-Leste, the supplementary interventions supported by ALMA are helping improve teaching quality, but these activities of peer learning and support from school leaders is dwindling following the end of the program, which provides substantial financial and mentoring support. The third theme that is coming out of our study today is about embedding teacher development. As we all know, support systems are absolutely critical to sustaining and integrating gains from initial teacher development inputs such as training. What we're finding at the moment is that the capacity and availability of institutional structures, such as from principals and subnational education officers to support ongoing teacher development and monitoring, is varied and quite limited. Across the countries, there are some common findings. First, limited budgets, and they're a key challenge to ongoing professional learning like peer learning sessions and regular monitoring. For example, in Vanuatu and in Laos, provincial officers have limited funds to regularly monitor and provide follow-up support to schools. Second, what we're seeing is that effective school leadership capacity is important for facilitating ongoing professional learning, and that teachers really value this support through peer learning processes, communities of practice and observations. And finally, a lack of accountability for improved teaching and learning poses a challenge. Principals, teachers and provincial officers are not being held accountable to drive an improvement agenda. Our last theme is monitoring teaching quality and student learning. What we found through our experience of designing and implementing these 3 studies is the value of investing in rigorous monitoring of teaching and student learning outcomes, both at the systems and classroom level. At the systems level, a robust system monitoring can help governments understand what is working and not working in a system, and they can make requisite changes to curricula, teaching, assessment and resourcing to improve learning. Whether such a system exists varies across the countries. In Vanuatu, they actually implement 2 large-scale assessments. The first, a national standardised achievement test called VANSTA, and second, they participate in a Pacific Regional Literacy and Numeracy test called PILNA. In Laos, while there are other large-scale assessments for other grades, for the study, we were interested in grade 1, given the rollout of the curriculum was focused on grade 1 in its first year. We actually were able to design a fit-for-purpose grade 1 student assessment, and we've now implemented that for the study for the baseline, and will do so and have done so again for a post-intervention study stage. In Timor-Leste, there's no national assessment. For the study, we've relied on a snapshot student learning data available from other projects, being specifically an EGRA and an EGMA. Now, if we go to the classroom level, an interesting aspect of the new curriculum rollouts in each of the countries is that teacher capacity to undertake classroom-based assessment is a key focus in each. Data can help teachers to formulate strategies that target individual learning needs, and that's particularly important due to COVID-19 and the learning disruptions. Our findings in Vanuatu and Timor-Leste suggest that teachers are focused on changing assessment practices, but further support is needed. And this will be an area of investigation in Laos. Now I'll go to the final part of our presentation, which is about recommendations. From the 4 themes identified from the study series in this first phase, we've developed a range of policy, program and research recommendations. But for this presentation, we've decided to focus on educational assessment, given this is the panel's focus. So in terms of policy, our first recommendation is that policymakers need to commit to and resource systems for monitoring student learning at the system and the school level. Efforts need to be made towards building the capacity of policymakers to analyse and use the findings of assessments in order to inform policies and practices related to curricula, teaching, assessment and their resourcing in order to lift achievement levels and improve equity of outcomes. And equally, these sorts of efforts for capacity building need to be made to support understanding of teachers and principals. In terms of programming recommendations, firstly, to address challenges specific to the experience and needs of each teacher and their students, school-based professional development models play an important role. And here, it's important to look at strengthening school leadership capacity of principals and the capacity of sub-national officers who can facilitate these sorts of learning models. And all as related to COVID and the learning disruptions, measures need to be put in place to help teachers assess where children are at once school resumes, and therefore then to use that information to target remedial strategies to ensure that the most disadvantaged students are not further left behind. Teachers and principals need ongoing professional learning to support them to understand and to undertake the results of classroom-based assessments. And finally, in relation to research, we have a number of recommendations. Firstly, the outcomes of teacher development approaches on teaching quality and student learning needs to be monitored meaningfully and systematically over time. And using a range of approaches, including classroom observation data, teacher and education stakeholder data, and fit-for-purpose student assessments can help us provide greater insights into the complex nature of teaching and learning. And going beyond academic outcomes to monitor aspects such as student engagement can also provide a more complete view given the holistic nature of student learning. And that brings our presentation to a close. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, both Elizabeth and Debbie, for almost keeping the time. Yeah, it was like something like 17 minutes, but it's okay. Let us take about 5 minutes to get some questions from the participants. Who would like to start? Well, while we're waiting, maybe I'm going to ask you a question. At the end, I thought that was interesting that you identified the necessity to do some capacity building on the data usage. What would be the barriers of not using the data? I'm sure that all of the countries, except for the Timor-Leste, that there are some, learning assessment data that have been collected, internationally or nationally, and yet, are they actually using the data? Or you were mentioning that you were going to do some capacity building on the data usage. So I was just wondering what would be the barriers of not using those data that are available. So while we wait for other questions to come in, we could probably attack that question.
I'm going to throw it over to Elizabeth and her experience with Vanuatu and Pilna, I think. Is that okay, Elizabeth?
That's okay, Debbie. I hope, Miyoko, that I answer the question. I guess the question is around barriers of not using the data and government and capacity of governments or building capacity of governments to use data. I think we are lucky in Vanuatu with VANSTA, which is the national student assessment that happens in year 4 and 6. Now that's very recently been, well, it was implemented back in 2009, but re-implemented in 2017. And they have distributed that data to government, and they report it. It's an every 2 years national examination that's census based. So we are able to use that data, and it does enable us to get a sense of how students are achieving against the new curriculum. And because we don't have a fit for purpose assessment there. The other so the VANSTA data actually, though, is not available at student level. So the results are not distributed to students, although schools do know those results. Through the PILNA program, however, and I've been quite involved in that program, we can use that data. That's a regional assessment of students' literacy and numeracy in years 4 to 6. So we're able to, the kind of capacity that we've done in terms of PILNAs, we've supported governments in learning how to use questionnaires and align some of the findings that we get from those questionnaires with what's coming out from the literacy and numeracy assessment. So it's a complex question, Miyoko, and if we can support governments to really help them to think more about using data, I think that's a really positive thing. And we have been lucky with the 2 assessments available to us in Vanuatu. Even though they're not directly linked to the actual research that we're doing, we can get some indications of student improvement over time.
All right. Thank you very much for answering my question. Let's see. Can I ask Julia or someone to see if we have some questions coming in through the chat, or do you want me to go through that? Marina, are you doing that?
Yes, we just received the comments in the chat, Miyoko. Do you want me to read that? Okay, so it's from Shanos Omonova, who says, I believe the government need advancements in assessments in process of school teaching, not only for university, but at the same time in the secondary school level too. I guess that was a response to Elizabeth's comment just now. And in the meantime, we didn't receive any additional questions, so maybe we can tackle those at the end together.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. So we thank one more time Elizabeth and Debbie for the excellent presentation. So now we will go to the second presentation, which is going to be about the formative assessment with Baloo app, which is an application, I'm sure, how it works, which is the title of the presentation. It's going to be presented by Saule Hamzina and Aikine Yospova. I'm sorry about my presentation. Saule Hamzina is from RTI, well, both of them, okay, RTI International, USAID, also Aikine Yospova. So Saule and Aikine, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We are glad to present our presentation. We are going to present it in Russian. And we are both from, as you mentioned already, yes, from USAID Okul Kirimet project implementing in Kyrgyzstan by RTI. And today we want to present you, I'm moving in Russian. Сегодня мы собираемся презентовать.
Today we plan to present
инструмент, который мы
an instrument that we have developed and have begun implementing in our work. And the program is called Baloo app.
Оценочный, скажем,
This is
оценочное приложение.
An assessment of app.
Согласно нашему стандарту,
according to the government standard in Kyrgyzstan, formative assessment is one of the types of assessments that is used to determine students' progress. A lot has been done to help teachers learn to use formative assessment, but we see that even now, there's a lot of effort that needs to be done to conduct formative assessment, and it's quite difficult to use. And we examine formative assessment as a so this is a way of assessing. There seems to be a sound problem. Can you hear me? You're on the English channel, so you need to switch to the Russian channel. I apologize for interrupting. Okay, I will change the channel. How do I do that?
Stop sharing and okay.
Все. Сейчас давайте еще раз попробуем на всякий случай.
Хорошо. Я, наверное, начну все-таки вот с содержательного вот этого слайда, хорошо?
I will start then with this slide. Is everything okay now? Yes, I apologize. So I don't know if you could, okay, then I will start my presentation once again. And briefly mention the slides that I passed through. Okay, our presentation is about formative assessment using the technological solution that we developed as part of our project, and it's called Baloo app. This solution, I will explain why we began doing this. But first, I want to explain that formative assessment is one of the types of assessment that is used in the classroom. And is described in the government standard of 2014. However, over these years, we observe how this is carried out in the classroom, and see that teachers have great difficulty both with implementation and with understanding what formative assessment is. We understand formative assessment as assessment of the progress of instruction, what difficulties the student is experiencing, and what needs to be done by the student and by the teacher in order to improve the instruction process. What happens? This is what is declared at all levels, in all subjects and in government standards, but it's quite difficult for teachers because it requires a change in their attitudes, in the attitudes of teachers. The concept of orienting their instruction to the student. And so we found a technical solution which helps teachers to implement this. And we hope that by using the app, they can understand better the goals of formative assessment and how they can use the information they obtain to improve the instruction process. We developed this app on the Tangerine platform, and we believe that through this app, we provide instruments for assessing reading skills and reading comprehension. We're going to develop this further for math skills, and there's assessment and feedback provided by this app. I will tell you more about it in a minute. First, a few words about the Tangerine platform. This is software developed by RTI International for different purposes. It can be used both in laptops and mobile devices and iPads. And this is used in different languages in different countries. The main three goals of using Tangerine are for conducting live screening and large-scale studies of progress, students' progress, and it's also used for observing, lecturing, and for mentoring. And today we are going to talk about the part in the middle, which is related to providing quick assessment of the instruction process. Here we're going to talk about reading skill progress. So what do we use Ballo app for? In order to help support teachers with a technological support. Of course, technology is not a solution, but it is an assistant. It provides help to teachers. And the way it does this is through the use of different instruments for assessment and gaining objective information about reading skills and reading comprehension. And this helps teachers give directed feedback to individual students. And we heard in the previous report of Isaac Frumin that feedback is the most important part of assessment. And this helps teachers reflect upon their teaching methods, because they get data from the students and can analyze this data. And based on these solutions, based on these data, then decide how to adapt their instruction based on the information obtained. And this helps to differentiate their instruction. And this is a question raised by the previous talk. Through this data and through this app, we help teachers use this data to improve their instruction methods and outcomes. What is assessed? As I said, our project focuses on reading and reading comprehension in lower education classes, but we plan to include also, okay, and as part of reading, reading includes alphabet, decoding, phonetic perception. And our instrument is designed to assess and provide feedback on these components of reading skills. How we do this and what instruments we use for this, my colleague Ms. Yusupova will tell us about this. Here you can see the instruments of formative assessment on the screen here, and the Balo app includes 17 tools. As you can see, these instruments are used from grade 1 to 4. For the first class, we have 5 formative assessments, and starting in the second class, second grade, we have 4 instruments applied. The teacher can use these instruments through the entire school year. Two instruments are used for the first semester, and 2 instruments are used for the second semester. And in the last column of the table, you can see the title of the instrument, which assesses these 5 basic skills which Salome mentioned. What are these stages of using Balo app? The first stage is assessment of the student, which is conducted through Balo app on the phone or on an iPad or on a computer. And this is conducted in 4 languages, in Russian, Kyrgyz, Uzbek, and Tajik languages. The second stage of assessment is providing feedback. Feedback is provided both for the student and for the teacher. And the final stage of using Balo app is improving instruction and teaching through the use of recommended teaching strategies, through the use of reading materials, and through parent involvement to support their children. On this slide, we have shown a tool which is used to assess phoneme perception, and this is called determining the first sound in a word. And this is used in the first semester of first grade. On this slide, you see this tool. This is something the student uses, and the teacher uses either an iPad or a phone or a computer. And then on their gadget, they see the students' responses. Dear colleagues, let's now look at how this program works, how this app works. In order to begin working with this app, the teacher has to register first. After registration, the teacher adds their classroom and enters data about their region and the school and so forth. After this, the teacher makes a list of the students by pressing the button Add a Student. There they write the name of the student. And here on this slide, you can see a list of students. After the list is created, the teacher can begin testing by pressing the button next to each student, and then can choose which test will be used to assess the student. Here, for example, we see the test for assessing phoneme perception. And when the teacher is conducting testing, they see a description of the instrument, then an instructions for using, and particular material which the test is based on. This is the panel that the teacher works with in Balo app, where they see the students' responses. After the teacher conducts testing of students, they press the button Choose .
Выходит обратная связь. Вот, например, на этом слайде мы видим обратную связь, которая вышла на одного из учеников. Обратная связь, она состоит из 3 частей. Первая часть, она констатирует факт, то есть тот результат, который достиг ученик. Вторая
the
часть,
student obtained. The second part of feedback is for the student, what the student should do in order to improve his outcome, his result. And the third part of feedback is provided for the teacher, what the teacher needs to do, what steps can be made to help the student improve his result on this task. Here you can see that all results of the students are broken down into 5 levels, depending on their result. Also, as part of feedback, recommendations are provided with links to strategies for working with materials. And these materials are part of the curriculum modules and can also be found on the site of the Ministry of Education of Kyrgyzstan. Also, there are links provided to children's books for this particular levels. And these books can be found in all school libraries and on the website of the Kyrgyz Ministry of Education. To conclude, we want to say that we conducted a pilot study of this instrument in 12 schools and discussed
Обратную связь. По этому
with
инструменту позитивную обратную связь.
teachers, the teaching community, and gained feedback from them. And currently, we've passed this information and this instrument to the Kyrgyz Ministry of Education, and it's planned to be used across 75% of the schools of our country. And we will train teachers and school personnel, school staff to use this instrument, and then we'll provide monitoring of the use of this instrument. In the future, this app will be open source. Teachers can use it for assessment of reading skills, and in the future, math skills and math skills for elementary school students. Once again, I want to emphasize the importance of formative assessment and types of assessment for improving instruction. And this assessment is very important because it allows us to differentiate our approaches to students. And this also helps teachers to support groups of students or particular students in particular ways, depending on their particular results for different skills. We are certain that regular use of this instrument will help teachers to improve their competency, their level of instruction, and also help students improve their learning outcomes. We see Ballo app as an instrument that can be adapted to different subjects. And we're working with math, and we see interest from other partner organizations in adapting the instrument for other subjects. So we hope that we have an interesting future in the use of this app. That is all we have to say today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Saul and Aikine. Perfectly, you were respecting the timing, so that was great. Let's see. I was just able to see one of the questions which was just coming out, which was in English, and then that question was about whether this application is available in English. Would you like to take that up? The question. Saul and Aikine.
А можно я?
Еще раз повторите вопрос, пожалуйста.
Can you repeat the question, please?
The question was if your Balloon app software is available only in the language that you mentioned, or also in English. That was the question that I saw.
В нашей стране
In our country, the app is only available in 4 languages, but I'm sure that for for other countries, because this is a platform that's available to all, I'm certain that similar apps in other languages are available, but in our country, it's only in 4 languages. And can I move to the other questions? I see questions in Russian. So how is this tool perceived in schools by teacher? Is it treated as a panacea? We are just piloting the use of this program, and teachers see that it's a good tool for supporting their activities, and they're using it not to grade students, but to track their progress through formative assessment and through obtaining feedback. But of course, we'll see what happens in the future as it's applied across the country. The next question is whether we plan to give this instrument or provide courses for pedagogy students. We are planning right now who will be using this program, and we are thinking about the assessment department of the Ministry of Education, and we are creating training for teachers in the use of this instrument, but we're also planning next year to begin working with pedagogical universities. And then we will begin using this instrument as a kind of in the process of university instruction. So there was one, okay, that was a translation of the question. What else do we have here? Can we share experience with teachers of pedagogical universities? Yes, I think this can be adapted. And yes, we will be working with pedagogical universities this year. So we can use this in Kyrgyzstan this year. As for a mechanism monitoring, that was the last question. What are the monitoring mechanisms that ensure the use of formative assessment? This is a good question. We don't plan to gather data, although we have the opportunity to do this. We're not going to be analyzing students' data. We're only going to be monitoring how teachers are using the app. Are they downloading it? How actively are using it? We have the chance to see a statistical dashboard with data on the use of the app. So we will monitor the use of the app. Okay, there's a question. Does the teacher have the chance to set the contents of tasks, or the tasks are included already in the app? As we said, the tasks are already part of the app. They're included with the app. But because this instrument was developed to support our teachers, this can be a stimulus for teachers to develop similar instruments that they can use in their practice, in addition to what is used in the app. There are a lot of questions here. That's great.
All right. Okay, thank you very much for all the participants to ask many questions. We had very lively discussions, so that was great. So thank you very much again, Saul and Aikine. Now we will go to the next question. Let me see. The next presentation is about pedagogical design. Okay, so it's pedagogical design is a new competency of a teacher in the digital world, which is the title of the presentation. This is going to be made by Arira Santakovna, who is from ORLU, which is the name of the organization. Okay, would you like to take the floor?
Добрый вечер, уважаемые
Ten, are you
коллеги.
there?
Yes, hello, dear colleagues. Can you see the slides? So
Yes.
is the pedagogical design and the new competence of a teacher in the digital world. So I work in the Institute for the Capacity Development of Teachers in Kazakhstan. And unlike the previous presentation, I focus more on the pedagogical design and its use for generating the teaching content or teaching materials. And there are certain really pressing questions today: how to manage a school in very fast changing digital world. And there are a lot of challenges out there, and we need to think what to be based on when teaching and what could be useful for the teaching process. Today, we are facing a clash between the education of the well-developed world following certain models and the VUCA world, so to say, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and full of ambiguity, which are the words that stand for the abbreviation of VUCA. So this VUCA world is a challenging world, and it calls for different soft skills like vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. So in this today's world of very unsustained perceptions, we need these soft skills to sustain and to live on. And all these soft skills are actually integrated in some hard skills, in some other competencies. For instance, some of these soft skills are very closely integrated into economy knowledge. Also, we can see some interdependency and interlinkages between different domains and different competencies. And we need to develop soft skills such as empathy, interpersonal skills, cross-cultural tolerance, etc. And we also need to develop the 21st century skills that actually the 4K teaching model, critical thinking, communication, teamwork, and creativity. And also we need to develop a competence that is called a pedagogical designer, which is actually a person who constructs the educational environment using different methods of teaching, specializations, and information design in order to improve the perception. The pedagogical design is actually considered both as a theory and a practice. And we actually consider practice as the creation, use, and evaluation of teaching situations or conditions and means. And we believe that we need to create and support a learning environment and a teaching environment in which teachers would be able to use different kinds of resources for the learner, and at the same time the learner would have conditions to study in comfortable conditions, comfortable environment, and then apply the gained knowledge in practice. And we are using certain principles for structuring the teaching process. And We are using different services and tools that enable us to efficiently and effectively present the material. We are basing ourselves on materials that have been designed by Robert Garnier. So the purpose of this materials is to attract attention, to provoke, to trigger interest to a topic. We need also to plan for the outcomes and to assess progress on the way towards the final outcome. We also need to evaluate the existing knowledge of the learners so that we would build on the new knowledge on the already existing knowledge base. We need to help the learners remember the material and later on get back to it. We need to support the knowledge with practical assignments and exercise. And when we use the pedagogical design, we need to pay attention to using lectures together with, in combination with, interactive teaching methods. And also we need to ensure feedback so that the learners and the teachers would see the assignments, the results of the assignments, and we need to assess performance. And we need to use easy to understand criteria for evaluating the obtained knowledge. And in practice, we need to have the learners use the obtained knowledge in their everyday life. And again, all this teaching material should meet the criteria of visuality, accessibility, etc. So in order to elaborate a pedagogical design, we need to use different models that are out there. Most frequently, we use the AD model, which consists of 5 interlinked and repetitive phases or steps. Step 1 is analysis of the objectives of the teaching. We try to evaluate the level of knowledge of the learner and to identify steps towards the final goal. When we have the stage of design, when we try to choose a format of education, a teaching format, and develop a teaching strategy. When the development phase, when we develop the materials, the methodology and tools, when we have the implementation phase, and finally we have the evaluation phase. And every single step and stage of this process is very important for achieving the final result. So actually this is a step-by-step, a detailed approach towards elaborating a teaching curricula or organizing a teaching process. And we actually try to teach, taking into consideration some age-specific, gender-specific characteristics and some specifics of our ability to memorize things and to self-develop. And we also need to pay attention to the teaching experience as well as learning experience. So for instance, if we take a teacher, before we started online teaching, actually, it was absolutely different. And before we started teaching online, we had to take courses. We had to learn ourselves how to do it because of the pandemic. And again, pedagogical designer skills were very important in developing and designing new online materials. Like, for instance, the skills of generating very simple PowerPoint presentations, very simple visuals that would be available online. And we need to identify this the so-called triangle of teaching, which includes actually the purpose of the material and of the teaching process that we're applying. We need to elaborate teaching materials that are going to be used by learners in the process of learning. And we also need to ensure monitoring and evaluation, including different tests, exams, quests, using different digital tools and services. So all these three components, the entire triangle, is actually an interlink of these three components, and it meets two major criteria or rules. First, if the three components are interlinked in an appropriate way, when the results would be positive. If at least one component is missing from this triangle, then the teaching would fail. It would not be efficient. And any moment of the teaching design or teaching product design should meet certain criteria or characteristics. First of all, these should be person-oriented. So it should be focused on the learner. Also, it should be purpose-oriented, and the purpose should be linked to the practical use of the knowledge in the real world. Also, we need to be empirical. We should use only evidence-based data. Another typical characteristic is teamwork, and any model needs to operate teaching design objectives. First of all, you need to analyze the needs of your target audience. So before you actually design a teaching program, a curriculum, we usually carry out a needs assessment of the target audience, and then we formulate the objectives, we develop the assignments, and when we choose the methods of teaching, we generate visuals, we develop tests, quests, data collection forms, etc. And we also develop visuals like videos, presentations, PPTs, and when we develop the content, we develop the methods to ensure the efficiency of the content conveying process. And finally, we can see that the teaching design skills are enlarged today, and a teaching designer, a teaching process designer should have digital skills, be capable of identifying conflicts, controversies, and also have problem-solving skills, have good mastery of teaching design skills and knowledge. And I think this comprehensive set of skills and knowledge would ensure high quality content of the teaching material and good and easy to understand design of the materials. Another task of a teaching designer is to elaborate online or distance learning methods in order to introduce modern digital technologies to the teaching process. Teaching designer actually be used as a means or as a tool to elaborate the digital content, and it actually helps to find a good balance between traditional knowledge and distance learning. Traditional learning and distance learning. Like for instance, in our country, we have online learning, online teaching process, but one day a week, today they have offline learning or they are back to schools, but one day a week where they still have online learning, which means that all the teachers should be able to develop this digital media environment, digital tools, and then be able to use the digital methods to evaluate the knowledge in learners. And in recent years, we hear a lot about design thinking. And these are the skills and competences that help better understand simple topics, simple subjects, as well as more complex topics. And
Sorry, would it be possible to
we
wrap
have
up?
to
1 minute. Wrap up in 1
Всё,
minute,
я уже
please?
заканчиваю. Таким образом,
yes, I'm wrapping up actually. So we can say that the teaching design today is a combination of economic efficiency, good results of teaching, taking into consideration the strengths and weaknesses of the learners, and elaborating needs-based approaches. So a teaching designer or pedagogical designer is a very interesting specialty today, and we need to help the learners master the knowledge with interest, and then get back for more knowledge, and then to apply it in everyday life. And of course, all these tools can be applied specifically to distance learning, online learning, in order to make it easier for the teacher and the learner. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ten. I'm going to start with Sergey Londer, who has his hand up. Would you like to come on with the question? Sergey Londer. I think
Дима,
you're on
надо
mute.
включить микрофон, мы вас не слышим.
You're on mute, Sergey.
Здесь я вижу, вопросы задает.
Я уже
Yes, can you hear me now? Yes, we can. So Amira actually touched upon a very interesting topic. Indeed, we use certain teaching standards, but in this fast-changing world, it's always a question whether these standards are practical. And when I look at this triangle, the purpose, teaching materials, and assessment of the outcomes, and I'm thinking, well, it is really very difficult to see if these teaching materials are efficient and effective or not. I'm from Ukraine, and in Ukraine, we are now creating and designing an information system for teaching, for teachers. And we are trying to actually have the education trajectory reflected in this IT system. Like, for instance, I will explain what I mean. We have an education database, we have a tax system database, we have a pension system database, we have a social welfare database, and we have police database. So if we try to interlink this database and try to understand how the data are linked there, like for instance, a person finishes school and continues working. So the question is whether the school has succeeded in giving him or her a certain education, a certain level of knowledge and morals, I would say, to continue in life. So if this person is not part of the police database, if he is a good and efficient taxpayer, that means that the school succeeded. That means that the school has managed to give him or her competencies that enabling this person to use this knowledge in practice, to succeed in life. And we can actually look at the background of the person, which school or kindergarten or university this person attended, and we can actually make some conclusions about the efficiency of education or in this specific educational institution. Well, if we speak about educational programs or curricula, like for instance, we have a managerial school, for instance, and as the requirements to managers change with time, the tools of teaching and the approaches also change. So we all the time have to update the educational programs. And we develop curricula, we develop teaching programs, again, using this teaching design approaches so that they would be efficient. So as far as I understand, you represent a college in Ukraine. No, I represent the State Institute of Educational Analytics under the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. So again, I repeat, we need to understand whether the programs, the teaching programs are efficient or not, because we're all human. We cannot always predict for make forecasts for 10 years to come or 20 years to come. We never know if the tools we're proposing now are going to be efficient 20 years later. So it is very important to have a feedback, and we need to find good tools for getting the feedback. I really like your approach that you call the teaching design approach, but I think one problem that we all share in education is getting the feedback in order to understand which
the interesting discussion, but we still have another presentation. We only have 14 more minutes. So I'm going to use my power to cut you off at this moment. I'm sorry about that. And so I encourage you to keep this discussion after the session that, so I'd like to thank again TEN for the presentation again. I'm just wondering that, there are other questions, but we may be able to take it up later if we have time. So I'm just going to go and introduce the final speaker of this session. The title is Criteria Assessment of a Student's Education and Research Work with Visual Materials. And it's going to be presented by Enlik Delayeva, who is from Abay Kazakh National Pedagogical University. I think we're going to probably hear more about the pedagogical issues. So Tenlik, please take the floor. Thank you. You're on mute in the translation.
Oh, okay.
Tenlik.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues.
Вы не на том, Тенлик, вам надо выбрать правильный канал. Вы должны перейти на русский канал.
You need to switch your channel. Please move to the Russian channel.
Okay.
Скажите что-то, по-моему, вы на русском теперь.
I think you're in the Russian channel now.
Так, вот так.
Can you say something? Is this okay? Yes, I think everything is fixed.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Нет, по-моему, вы еще до сих пор не на том канале, потому что я вас слышу.
I think you're on the wrong channel. I can hear you in the English channel.
Moment.
You have a button at the bottom where you can change the language. Is the presentation going to be in English or in Russian? It's okay now.
Okay, excuse me.
По-моему, я вас до сих пор слышу на английском канале.
We can hear you in the English channel. So I think I need to close several windows. Yes, I think everything is working now. How is it now? Can you hear me? I apologize for taking your time. Okay. Criterial assessment of students' educational and research work with visual materials. I'm going to be talking about visual materials through a prism of history, because I'm a historian. And so there's a special use of visual materials in historian disciplines. And of course, one of the useful strategies for online teaching is the use of visual materials. This was discussed by our colleagues today, Yoalir, I think, and she also mentioned this. And in pedagogical design, this is also an important component. After working online, starting to work online in spring 2020, teachers had to begin using using technologies of distance learning and start using visual materials depending on their subject matter. And we also had a need to begin assessing the use of these materials in instruction. And so I became interested in the subject because we all entered this era together as soon as the pandemic began. Literally on the next day, we began working online. History as a science was always based on literary materials. And if you discuss, and we always had to study literary material, and using sources of visual format, we began studying iconic changes, iconic turns, and this happened in the second half of the 19th century. The difficulty is that history is not classified only as a humanitarian or a social science. Traditionally, historical knowledge is part of the humanities. And in this sense, history is closer to art. And so one of the important aspects of teaching history is to form an image of the past, both in terms of chronology and also in understanding texts and the visual materials, creating an image. This is closer to art, and art is part of visualization. The purpose of our report is to provide examples of using visual materials in teaching students of history of the history department. So I'll give examples of visual materials and how they're used. Another goal is to create criteria for formative assessment of working with visual materials. And finally, propose criteria for assessment of working with the visual materials for students of the pedagogical specialties. Different types of visual contents which are used today in teaching history. Through digitalization, visualization becomes more and more important. Visual materials are provided in different forms. Drawings, drawings are a very early form of reflecting people's image of the world. This is a new type of graphic art. And the first thing that you can find in the earliest textbooks for elementary schools include lots of drawings. Historically, works are included, paintings are included, which have to do with history of different types. For example, historical paintings, also paintings of everyday life, also portraits, sculpture, miniatures, having to do with different periods of time through these materials. Also, maps are an important part of studying the past and their representation of geographical factors. Maps can show political, geographical, physical, and military events. And there are different types of digital instruments which can be used by students to form their own maps for the lessons that they are giving in school as part of their pedagogical practice. Photography as a type of visual content is the art of obtaining photographs where the creative process is framing a picture. But working with pictures, analyzing them, this is a completely different art and requires its own method of analyzing photographies. And of course, use by the student. Photography started in the 19th century and was a professional activity. There were special photography bureaus, and now it's a mass activity and is a mass source of studying the history of the modern period. And further, we have documentaries and historical films. Documentaries are, they reflect actual facts, who were witnessed by the directors or the authors of the documentary, but historical films are a reflection, an imagination of a past epoch. And historians need to understand the difference in order to use them in their teaching. And they shouldn't base their teaching only on historical films. Although historical films are actively used in public history, for example, which shows how society perceives different historical images and how the politics of memory work. And this affects instruction in schools and in universities as students study history. Another type of visual content are graphs which reflect different databases. Because these databases are of two parts, documentary, which reflect different documents, for example, a catalog of a library or archive documents. And there are also photographs, which are documents held in a database, also statistical databases, and working with databases is most successful if we portray the results in the form of a graph. I think everyone understands why, and this is very useful for students. It helps them to structure the information that they have on a certain subject, or as they're preparing for a seminar, and so forth. One of the last digital formats which students are are infographics. This is a visualization that helps them to use, and this helps them to reflect, to create a kind of visual text through infographics. Infographics is an informational graphic or a visual presentation of information and data. Traditionally, visual materials in historical disciplines had an illustrative function, and in other disciplines, this visual material was more of an illustration. Currently, visual materials require a careful use in the instruction process because they represent a visual text. For students who are studying to become teachers, history teachers in schools, it's important for them to develop, to learn to work with historical materials, portraying the history of different peoples and different historical time periods and different countries. It's important to connect the visual materials with time and space.
I think we lost the speaker. Is that right? I am not hearing anything at this moment. And actually, it is already, well, 90 minutes since we have started this. I'm just wondering if so far, well, if the presenter can just wrap up the presentation at this moment. If it's the end of the presentation, then we can probably ask some questions for the presenter. But well, there was a question about the assessment. I mean, this presentation and the last presentation were both about the pedagogical issues, and that is about the designing and development of the materials. Now, there was also a question about how we should be assessing the learning and then to connect with the learning or connect with the assessment in this type of development, pedagogical development. Would it be possible to also ask from the two last presenters, Tenlik and maybe from Ten, on this question?
Меня выбило, по-моему, да?
I think you lost me during my presentation. Tenlik, I apologize. We have a little time left, and we're finishing up here, and so we need to move on to the discussion so that we don't take too much time. Okay, then can I then just say here, we already need to hear your final words. Okay, then I will finish up here. I had examples which I wanted to show you. 3 minutes then. I apologize for I apologize. It's hard to finish at a conference and hard to start. Okay, formative assessment is, it needs, for formative assessment, you need to use the right material so that you don't replace certain images with the wrong images. And this requires competency on the teacher's part as they give recommendations to students. Different types of visualization exist for students, and summative assessment is when students develop their own content. And I had students who prepared tasks for schools based on different visual materials in order to assess, to provide formative assessment, so that this isn't just working with an illustration, but a type of creative assessment and creative analysis. And of course, I would need to show the example. And in this way, digital instruments are a way of processing information and organizing research material. Developing competencies for students includes developing critical analysis of literary and audiovisual materials in the context of a certain historical period. Just using literary written sources or only visual sources is not enough. They need to be combined. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Julia, would you like to just say concluding remarks? No? Or maybe we can ask all of the presenters to just to say the final words, just to end this session. Would that be okay, Julia? So, can I ask?
Yes.
Now, back to Elizabeth and Debbie. Just a one word, final word. Somewhere they're gone. We lost it. Okay. Selva, yes, you're there.
Sorry.
Okay. Final word.
Look, thank you very much. We've been very pleased to contribute some of our work on teaching and assessment in student learning.
Okay, great.
Is that okay?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Can we hear from Selva and Aikine? Final words?
Во-первых, спасибо большое за...
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. This was a very interesting presentation. And once again, we saw that as we heard in the keynotes by Isaac Frumin, that assessment needs to be based on an understanding of what we're assessing. In our presentation, we showed a toolkit, and the presentation before talked about how important it is for the teacher to develop professionally and understand what and why we are assessing. And this creates an understanding of a comprehensive understanding of assessment as a key for instruction outcomes and responding to instruction results. And so it's really great that we have examined assessment from all these angles as a part of this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, can we hear from 10? Adira, 10? Did we lose her?
Большое спасибо за организацию.
Thank you very much for for organizing this conference. It was very interesting to see and hear about the experience on a global scale, because you don't always have the chance to share this type of experience. And the experience of our Australian colleagues, our colleagues from Kyrgyzstan, was very interesting and practical, and their work is relevant to us. We may apply it, and we will think about what can be used in formative assessment, perhaps using these apps. Also, our Australian colleagues said some interesting things about how they conduct their studies. And I think that these conferences like this enrich us, and they make education in the world better. Thank you. Thank you to the organizers.
Thank you. Now, final word from Tenlik, please.
Yes, this was a platform for discussing that included representatives from different countries and continents, and all of us understand very clearly, as our colleague from Kyrgyzstan said, the main thing is understanding what we're assessing. And in each discipline, unfortunately, when we approach things with very broad criteria, generally this doesn't lead to further development. But when we have a very clear understanding of each subject and the pedagogical approach, pedagogical design, and for each subject, this is really great. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for, again, for all the presenters of all the presentations of today. So all the best with the continuous monitoring and evaluation and support for teaching and learning. All right, thank you very much. All the best.